So, hello everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Predrag Mijatovic and I will be your moderator this afternoon. Today's webinar is actually the second in a series of webinars on trending topics in media literacy. This series is part of the EU-funded regional project called Media for Citizens, Citizens for Media, a project that is carried out by my very own Novi Sad School of Journalism, along with 5 other regional organizations. The first webinar in this series was on revenge pornography. It was, I think, last Thursday, and you can actually check it out at the link that I am sharing to you right now in the chat. So that's the link for the first webinar, for the YouTube video of the first webinar. Now, our topic for today is media literacy and young people. And we have 2 speakers from the Guardian Foundation here with us. The first is Kelly Walls, Executive Director of the Guardian Foundation. And we have Margaret Holborn, Head of Secondary and Higher Education at the Guardian Foundation. Kelly and Margaret are going to talk about the experiences of the Guardian Foundation in developing sustainable media literacy programs for young people, how the Guardian Foundation works with schools and teachers, and how their work fits with the curriculum. So after Margaret and Kelly give their presentation, we will have a discussion. So I invite and I encourage all of you to write your questions and comments in the Q&A or in the chat sections down here in Zoom. Of course, we have interpreters for Bosnian, Croatian, Serbian, and Montenegrin. We also have interpreters for Macedonian and Albanian, and you can turn those on in the interpretation option also here in Zoom. You can also post your comments and your questions in your own language, and the interpreters will, of course, translate them, and I will read them out and ask them to Kelly and Margaret. Okay, so I think we've covered everything there is for right now. I will not bore you any longer. Instead, I'm turning the floor over to Kelly Walls and Margaret Holborn of the Guardian Foundation.
Predrag, thank you very much. Hi, everyone. It's so great to be here with you today to talk about developing media literacy programs for young people. Although I very much wish that we were all in Sarajevo together and not just on your screen from my room in London. Sarajevo is such a wonderful city, so hopefully we can join you in person next time. I'm Kelly Walls. I'm the Executive Director of the Guardian Foundation. And I'm going to talk briefly about the work that we do right across the foundation, and then my colleague Margaret Holborn, as Predrag said, will introduce herself shortly, and we'll talk about media literacy more specifically. But first of all, I just wanted to try and bring the work of the Guardian Foundation to life a little bit. So I'm actually going to start with a video, and so hopefully we can do that now. Just bear with me, I'll get this right. Okay, good. I'll play the video.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Worldwide News.
It feels so real. It feels that it puts in more pressure, which makes you do the more effort, which makes you feel more proud of it because you put in that effort, your heart into it as well.
It could boost some people's confidence because some of them in the beginning they were scared to talk in front of the people, but then they ended up doing really well.
I think I might want to be a journalist when I grow up.
Well, it's been given great insight anyway into how, the world of journalism works and, the sort of comings and goings of a professional journalist and, what their job consists of.
Okay, start when you're ready.
The designed age for PVC is 357. As I said earlier, 357.
We talk about going into newspapers and they think, what, be a journalist? They've learned actually there's a lot of backroom stuff, there's a lot of behind the scenes they could be doing, and that it doesn't have to be written form, it can be vocal, which is certainly what that generation are much more into.
So we're here to preserve the history of The Guardian and of The Observer. You probably know The Guardian's about to be 200. 5th of May 2021, in fact, will be our 200th birthday. And The Observer's even older, started in 1791, so there's a lot of history there to preserve.
In my second year of the Scott Trust Basery scheme, I worked in the environment desk for a couple of months, where I spent a lot of time on the ground covering the Extinction Rebellion protests, interviewing protesters, officials, even some celebrities all across London, from Google to Whitehall to Big Ben, and it was really good fun and a really good news reporting experience.
I think this workshop especially very important for me, and I think I will use his tips. Think that I'm old school, but he gave me the tools, shows me how I can change and how can I really help young students in a good way.
I think the news will be very good because we checked if it's real and we did our best.
Good. I have watched that video so many times, but I still love it. It still makes me smile every time. And I think you heard a lot of different UK accents there. So, but hopefully it gave you a gist. And I apologise in advance. I am Scottish, so I'll try and do my best with that as well. So today we're going to run through 8 broad sections, which will hopefully give you an idea of our journey, but more importantly, we hope it will give you some ideas to take away and apply in your own environments, your own situations. So this is how we've done it. It's one way, and obviously not the only way. So it'll be a little bit about the Guardian Foundation overall, why media literacy is so important to us. And then Margaret will walk you through a deep dive into the Education Centre, the development of the programme, the workshops, along with feedback and evaluation. Then a little bit about our Newswise programme for younger children. And then finally, I'll speak a little bit about our future and we'll welcome questions and discussions. So who are we? The Guardian Foundation is an independent charity that aims to increase access to the media. So we believe a free press is crucial to a functioning democracy, that everyone should be able to have their voice heard and engage with the media that they consume. And in order for the media to hold power to account, it must be made up of representative journalists. Our vision is a world where all people can tell their stories, access the truth, and hold power to account. Why do we exist? Well, there have always been challenges in media and news, and sadly right now, the crisis, as I'm sure you all know, is greater than ever. The rights of citizens to access independent quality news is under threat globally. Distorted and opaque ownership, unsustainable business models, the prevalence of mis and disinformation, the lack of diversity, all results in polarised societies and distrust in the media. We were established in 1993 by the Scott Trust, who own Guardian Media Group and who in turn own the Guardian and Observer newspapers. Back then we were the Scott Trust Foundation, and we focused on the support of independent media in Western Balkan regions, actually, in the beginning with one of the editor-in-chief, Peter Preston. And then we took the form of the Guardian Foundation in 2013, where the scope widened out to other areas. And so we'll obviously come back and talk about that. So what do we do? Our mission is formed in 3 parts. Firstly, to support independent media under threat. So working internationally, supporting and fostering independent media environments where essential stories can be told. Our main project right now is establishing an incubator environment for new media ideas in Turkey. We've been working in Turkey for the last few years, and we've really expanded that program to help develop sustainable independent media. So very excited about that, and that will be throughout the next 3 years. The second part is to promote diversity in news media. So that's all about widening access into journalism for underrepresented voices, breaking down the barriers to entry that exist in pursuing journalism as a career. This picture is 3 of our bursary students who we've funded to complete their master's degree in journalism, as well as work experience and paid placements at The Guardian. A really successful scheme that has seen many people go on to then have great careers in The Guardian and elsewhere. And to empower children and young people to engage with the news. So our specialist news literacy and education programs ensure that an understanding of and engagement with news begins at the earliest stage. And so much more of that to come. Our impact in a typical year, and clearly we can all agree 2020 was not a typical year, we engage with around 10,000 children and young people, with a particular focus on those from underrepresented communities, improving skills and knowledge around news, developing creative and multimedia skills, providing access to career opportunities, and giving them a platform for sharing their voices and their stories. Last year, we also worked with 105, very specifically, aspiring or professional journalists. So building their capacity for success in the industry and improving the diversity of voices that exist. For media literacy in particular, our work matters because of statistics like this. So a National Literacy Trust survey in 2018 found that only 2% of children in the UK have the critical literacy skills they need to tell if news is real or fake. 55% of UK 12 to 15-year-olds who use social media for news say it's difficult to tell whether news on social media is accurate or not. And 42% say they're not interested in news. Apparently it's too boring. So at the Guardian Foundation, we have 2 programmes that focus around news and media literacy and education. Newswise, which is our award-winning programme for 7 to 11-year-olds, and that delivers in schools all around the UK, and the Education Centre for ages 12 and over, and which Margaret is going to tell you much more about. So a little bit about the curriculum. The reason these programmes are so important is because news and media literacy are not taught as subjects in the UK. Meaning children and young people aren't adequately equipped to navigate the world of information that they're surrounded by and are therefore more susceptible to misinformation. Some of the skills and themes are presented within English, personal, social health and economic education, PSHE, history, citizenship, computing and media studies, so various subjects. There were aspects of it. But the Education Centre supports teachers in a range of those curriculum subjects and ensuring that news and media skills are boosted within those areas. Newswise specifically has a series of 15 lessons designed to directly link to and support aspects of the existing curriculum. So rather than being seen as extracurricular, it should help teachers teach the curriculum that they already have to teach with a news theme. We're eagerly awaiting the UK government's launch of a media literacy strategy later this year, we hope. And we hope that's going to increase the attention and increase the resources in this vital area. So I'll now hand you over to Margaret, who will walk you through the journey of the Education Centre.
That's great. Thank you very much, Kelly. So I am Margaret Holborn. I am the head of the Education Centre, but predominantly my role is secondary and higher education. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the journey that we've taken in developing the Education Centre and some of the programmes that we do, and also provide the opportunity perhaps to share some resources if you wish to take them away with you as well in terms of modelling one of our workshops. So a little bit about the Education Centre and what we do and what we aim to achieve. So if we move on, I'll explain a little bit more about the work that we do. So we're passionate about empowering young people to engage with the news, and there's sort of 4 ways that we aim to try and achieve this. Through access, so giving young people and schools and colleges who would never get that opportunity to come into a news organisation and to raise aspirations. For us, it's all about participation. It's about being authentic and giving them real learning experiences where they learn through participating in the news at The Guardian and at The Observer in our offices, where we have a dedicated classroom space. It's working with young people so they can navigate and understand how the news is chosen, researched, verified, reported and edited and produced. And finally, running through all of this is critical analysis, that they can develop those important questioning and critical skills when researching, fact-checking sources to produce trustworthy news. And those 4 themes run through all the programmes that we offer. So how do we do it? Well, in a normal year, a lot of our students would actually be coming into our actual education centre, which is in the Guardian offices, and we run a whole suite of programmes. Predominantly news programmes, but we also run history workshops. We do coding, where they code news quizzes. We also do video editing on climate change. We also do teacher training, that's essential to what we do. And we also, in smaller programmes, offer university Q&As, adult workshops for adult learners, and workshops for family as well. To support all of this learning, we also have resources on our website that you can access without even coming to a workshop. And currently at the moment, we are doing virtual delivery into schools and through a blended learning approach. So I'll talk a little bit more about our current virtual delivery. Well, finally, a little bit about, before I move on to our virtual delivery, I want to talk about our reach and impact. So Kelly mentioned about the number of students that we work with. So we had 8,000 students last year. And although we are based in London, we do have schools that come from across the UK. So we have schools that come from Cornwall in the south of England, all the way through up to the Lake District. We've also worked from schools in Europe, and we have universities that travel across the world to come to us as well. So we've had 145,000 participants take part in our sessions since we opened in May 2002. This is a picture of Aisha Tull. She came to one of our workshops when she was 14, and she credits us for kicking off her journalism career. She started working at the BBC, and she is now a news reporter for Channel 4 News. So I'm going to talk you through our journey. So we actually started in May 2002, but there was a 6-month sort of planning period in the run up to that. So in terms of how we managed to get to a point where we could deliver these media literacy workshops to schools, it was really important that we consulted with teachers, that we consulted widely, that we consulted with local education authorities. I'm not a journalist, I'm a teacher, so it was really important that I worked with as many journalists, editors and reporters that I could to really get a deep understanding of how news work and their ideas and advice about what might be useful and what might work. And then finally, we did a lot of work in terms of how we'd use technology as well. So that was a 6-month process. And towards the end, we ran a couple of focus groups with teachers and ran through a number of potential offerings that we could do. And that was vital in terms of getting feedback and analysis and sort of charting the journey that we were going to take. So we opened in May 2002 with just 2 workshops, one for younger students, one for older students, where they made a newspaper in real time. And then as a result of those pilots, we then recalibrated what we did. And then we opened fully in 2002 and ran a full academic year. Within 2 months of opening, we were fully booked. We hadn't done much marketing at all. Word of mouth spread within the teaching community, and we got exceptionally busy, which was brilliant. But at the same time, part of our mission is to work with underrepresented schools. So the following year, we managed our own booking system to make sure that schools apply, and then we allocated places rather than that we were available just for certain schools that were quick at booking. Throughout the next few years, we developed, expanded, innovated our workshops to reflect changes in journalism. And then we moved into the new Guardian offices with the Guardian before we were in a separate building. So the young people are actually coming into the education centre at the same time the journalists were going to work. And that's been fantastic in raising aspirations that young people, we say to young people, they come into the Guardian to do work experience for the day. In 2013, we ran the World Association of Newspapers Award for Enduring Excellence. And then in recent years, we've piloted and innovated again. So in 2016, we realised that, well, we knew that we could fill the education centre probably about 5 times over with younger students who are 9 to 11. So we started to think about if we could do something different in that age range and expand our reach. So we ran a pilot session with outreach sessions going into schools for an hour across London, and then also in Lancashire. The research and findings of all of those enabled us to set up with the National Literacy Trust and the PSHE organisation, Newswise, which I'll talk a little bit about further. Kelly mentioned, as you saw in the video, about our mass Fake or For Real workshop at the Hay Literary Festival. And as I mentioned earlier, we've now moved into the virtual learning space and have pivoted and learned quickly and are now delivering virtual sessions into schools. So, as mentioned, we're doing virtual workshops with schools at the moment, and we've now developed 4. Fake or For Real, which is the workshop that I'm going to model hopefully in a moment. Feature writing with older students. Make a Local newspaper is an adaptation of our core workshop where they come and make news in real time with us, and now the focus is on news in their locality. And Archives and Journalism, which is a workshop that we've developed in the run-up to the Guardian being 200. These sessions are delivered as a blended learning approach. So you can do the session if you wish to without any resources either side of them, but a lot of teachers want to have those resources before and after, and also so that they can then replicate that workshop with other students in their school. We also couldn't go into schools for quite a significant period of time at the beginning of this year, between January and March. But so we started to think about, well, how could we support teachers who were going to have to deliver them remotely to their students? So we set up teacher webinars where we ran through our workshops for them. We talked to them about how they could use the resources. And then basically we used the information to actually send that information out to schools. So the teachers modelled the actual workshops in their school. They told us the number of students that they used them with. And then they actually gave us feedback forms. So we know, for example, that one of our Fake or For Real workshops was taught across an entire year group in the school and was completed by 150 students. So that's been really useful, that we tried to adapt as much as we possibly can in terms of the situations that have been, that we've had to deal with, everyone's had to deal with in terms of lockdowns. I was asked by the organisers to talk a little bit about how we develop our workshops. And I think it's a 4-way process. I think we work through a planning, a design and building, a delivery, and an evaluating and reviewing cycle. And that iterates all the time when we think about how we're going to do a workshop and how we're going to actually put it into our main programme and offer it out to any school that would like to register for it. So I'm going to go through those 4 steps briefly. A lot of the things that I say may not apply to your particular situation, but I wanted to give you a whole range of ideas of what we thought about in terms of the planning process. So in terms of planning, I think the top thing is, why are we doing it? And what do we want to get from it? Is that we want to increase news engagement with young people? Is it about widening careers and participation, which that podcasting workshop that you saw early on particularly focused on? Is it on critical analysis? Is it on the sort of understanding of the news and wider access as well? So we think about all of those things when we're trying to plan a new workshop. As mentioned earlier on, it's really important that you work with journalists and media professionals and others who are doing similar things to see what's out there, but also to see, how does this link to latest developments? How does this link to innovation in journalism? Importantly for the teachers, how are we helping them teach the curriculum? Or is it more that it's an enrichment activity, that it's an extracurricular activity? Then we think about the ages. And then at that point, when we've got a rough idea of what we might want to do, then we might do a focus group, which is exactly what we did with our virtual workshops. What can you use from previous work that you've done before? And then key important point is it authentic? Is it innovative? Is it something that a teacher's going to want to do because it's something that those young children or young adults wouldn't have a chance to do? With all our workshops, we try and make sure that there's a creative output. So they actually produce something by learning through the news, be it a newspaper, a video, a Fake or For Real video, which I'll talk about in a moment. They code their own news quiz. Other things we need to think about are safeguarding, And then finally, we need to think about how we're going to measure it. What at the end of the day do we want to achieve, and how can we actually measure that the students have actually engaged with that and it's what the teachers would like us to do. So that's planning. That's probably the longest one of the whole lot. And then I'll move on to designing and building. Then you need to think about what your teaching methodology is. Is it going to be on site, which is for us slightly easier? Is it going to be outreach, but that's a lot more beneficial in going into schools? Is it going to be virtual, or is it going to be a combination of any of the first three with supported resources and materials? How long is the session going to be? I mean, all our virtual sessions are no longer than about 40 minutes because it's the time that you work in, and also how do you make that interactive? Our on-site workshops run from 10 in the morning to 2:30 in the afternoon. So it's an immersion through a whole day. Some of the other ones, the outreach sessions that we did were an hour. So again, it's the timing. What resources you're going to have to teach it? What resources are the teachers going to have? What resources are the students going to have? And really important, it's even demonstrated today, allow more time for tech. Tech will always take longer than you think. The software will always take longer than you think, and build in some additional time for that. Then I would produce a session outline with our colleagues, and then we'd run through it with some colleagues. We'd just get some colleagues into the education centre, perhaps with some cake and some chat, and actually just run through the actual session, and they can sense check it for you. And they can say, actually, that's not in the right order, or that doesn't make sense. And then after practicing, we would then liaise with the pilot schools who are going to take part in our pilot and let them know in detail exactly what the session might be. So to sort of manage their expectations of what that might be. So moving on, we'll talk a little bit more now about delivery. So when you're running a first session, I would always do it with a school that you've worked with, one that you've been in contact with for quite some time. It might be a school that's in your focus group. It might be a school that you've worked with before. They will give you really detailed feedback because they know you, and they won't just be polite, and you need that detailed feedback. I would always recommend that you team teach, that you two of you teach together, because then you can do various sections of the session between you, and then you can also start to engage the audience as well, rather than having a different perception of just sort of leading it all the way through yourself. I would analyse the teacher and student feedback in quite a lot of detail. It would probably be worth your while to actually phone the teacher up afterwards and have a detailed conversation with them. And then you're going to modify and adjust and rewrite as required. And then I would recommend that you do a second session with a completely different school, with different ages, different needs or requirements, or that you might have to do different differentiation in terms of the learning outcome. And then I'd work through exactly the same process again of modifying and adjusting. And then I would deliver a third session with our team as well. I think if you can do it at least 3 times before you open it out, then at least you've got enough findings to actually sort of get a sort of feedback on what the session is. The first session may go brilliantly. The second session, you might have to do some rewriting on. You can't just assume that one school is going to give you all the information that you need to then offer out that programme. And then finally, I'm going to talk about evaluation and feedback. So review all the pilot sessions together, be critical, think about any changes or improvements that you can make, go back to what you originally started with and think about, does the feedback match our objectives and the learning outputs and the level of student engagement that we wanted? You sometimes find that you get another objective that you hadn't even thought about, but that's quite interesting as well, because I think you make assumptions about where you might be. But again, that's really, really important. I'd go back to the participating teachers again and adjust and modify. And then at that point, we'd offer it out as a programme on our existing website to make it open out to students and to teachers to actually book for their students. So that's the process that we would do. So it's that sort of 4-step of planning, building, delivering and evaluating. So
Margaret, if I just may, some of our interpreters are having trouble catching up to you, so
I'll slow down. Yeah, I do apologize.
Slow down just a little bit. Okay.
Sorry.
No problem.
So what do we evaluate? Okay. So we evaluate a number of things. So we evaluate our teaching and workshop content. So we ask the teachers to give us feedback on our teaching and workshop content. We ask the teachers about whether they have gained resources and teaching ideas and how it fits into the curriculum. We ask from the students and the teachers depending on the workshop, and all of the workshops, about the level of engagement with news, their understanding about news production, depending on the workshop. So that might be in a news or a features workshop. Their confidence in researching, writing and editing news or feature articles, if it's that workshop. And in terms of fake or for real as well, it would be confidence in checking whether a story is trustworthy, and also research and questioning skills when checking a news story. So we'll evaluate against our aims, and we'll also evaluate from the teachers in terms of what support and content that we've actually given them as well. So moving on. So I've been asked to run through a workshop that we teach, and this is our virtual workshop, Fake or For Real. So as mentioned, this is between 30 to 40 minutes that we deliver virtually into schools, and we try and make it as interactive as we possibly can in the context of delivering in a virtual delivery space. So I'm going to run through the session. There's a lot more slides that might exist, but I'm just going to give you sort of like the highlights of what the session might be. So we're a news organisation, and it's really important at the very beginning of the session that we just set the context. So we will talk a little bit about The Guardian, who we are, about The Observer, about our website, and about who reads us. This won't be for very long, it would only be for a minute or two, but it just sets the scene of what the workshop will be in terms of how we are and what we are as a news organisation. On the next slide, then we will talk a little bit more about who we are and how we actually work with our journalists. So these are our journalists. Our office, unfortunately, doesn't quite look like this at the moment. Normally have about 600 journalists working on this big news floor, most of them working remotely. But it gives the young people a sort of context, and we talk at this point a tiny little bit about careers and about journalism and about reporting and about editing, and we're just setting the scene of how we actually work at The Guardian. And again, this would be no more than a minute or two at most. Moving on. We then go on to describe how and what young people are going to learn in that session. So we have 4 aims for this workshop. So in this workshop, we will discuss with young people, and they will discuss with us about how they find out about news stories. The second thing that we will do is we will get them to analyse different ways that stories might be misleading. Thirdly, they will discover what skills they need to check whether a story is trustworthy or not. And then finally, they will go on to create a fake or for real presentation using recent news stories. The picture there is of Leah Green. She presents The Guardian's Fake or For Real series on Instagram every Friday. And we use that as a model that we work for the creative output of this workshop. So we start off with this picture. So I'm going to start off with you as well. Here is a picture. We want you to think, and I'll give you about 20 seconds to do this. What is going on in this picture and what you think might happen next? Okay. So when we do this exercise with young people, we get he's running away from a car, he may be in trouble. We get perhaps he's running to his mum. And some young people assume that something not good is going to happen. This is a second picture of the same story. And again, we get the young people to think about what's going on in this picture. So again, we get lots of different answers as well. But again, we get answers around perhaps he might be attacking the young man, attacking the man in the hat. Perhaps he might be stealing some money from him. But again, a lot of the answers that we get, not necessarily all of them, are potentially, this is not a great situation. Okay. So this is actually from a Guardian advert from 1986. And we're now going to play you the video in whole. So let's see if this works.
An event seen from one point of view gives one impression. Seen from another point of view, it gives quite a different impression. But it's only when you get the whole picture you can fully understand what's going on.
Okay, this advert we can supply to you is a YouTube video. If we were showing it in the Education Centre, we'd actually show it and pause it after each section and get the young people to actually vote as well. But it's really interesting in looking at things like unconscious bias and also getting the fact that young people make assumptions just on a picture or just on something that you actually see. So moving on, once we've had a discussion about this and the video, we talk a little bit more about the working day. I'm going to briefly walk through these slides because again, it's just setting context. So we talk about how we work at The Guardian. We talk about the fact that we're a 24-hour news organisation. We talk about the web editors and we talk about the structure of the day. Then we move on to talk about how the day is actually formed. And the important point that we make once we've discussed all these slides is how videos, apps and social media fit into the news cycle. So moving on, we're going to talk a little bit more about how we interact with the students. So the next thing we're going to do, and you might want to think about this yourself, or you might want to think about it and think what you assume young people might come up with. So what we ask the young students or young people to do, or the teachers as well, is to discuss and write down up to about 4 ways that they find out about news. Have about a 10-second think. And these are some of the things that they come up with. This is not it's a much longer list than this, but these are the key ones. They come up with TV, radio, newspapers, friends and family, teachers, internet, and apps and social media. So we then go into discussions about how that news is disseminated to them, how long they might actually look at a piece of news. So with apps and social media, it could literally just be a line of a piece of news or a headline, as opposed to 2 minutes, perhaps sitting down and watching an article on the news. Ofcom, which is the communications regulator in the UK, has done quite a lot of work around young people's engagement with news. And actually in the 12 to 15 age range, they found out that the top 2 ways that people find out, or young people find out about news, is friends and family, and then TV, and then apps and social media is third. Other things that you can do at this point is you can get the young people to actually rank how they find out about news. So in terms of the various methods of communication, in order in terms of their sort of how trustworthy they think they are. So you can go in different conversations about this depending on the age range that you're working with. So what we're going to do now is get you to do some voting on your gut reaction. Normally when we're with the young people, even in the virtual setting, they will have printed off some fake or real signs so they can vote and flip them over. So there would normally be about 8 of these. We're just going to do 4 of them, but you'll get the general idea. So this is something that, again, that you can replicate if you wish to. So let's look at the first story. So this is the famous Disney castle in Florida. So do you think the spires, they're the little blue roofs on the top, do you think they remove them when there's hurricanes, because they get lots of hurricanes in Florida? So you've got to decide very quickly whether you think that is fake or for real. Okay. That is fake. It's an example of a rumour that's been around for an awful long time. And every time you think it's going to be debunked, it comes back again, particularly when Florida has some really strong hurricanes. But it's a really good example to show as a rumour. So the next one. Right, do you think they're using robots in care homes in the United Kingdom to reduce the loneliness of old people? This one is true. Yes, they are trialling using robots that do interact and communicate with elderly people, and it's having really good success. So the next one. Okay, this photograph shows hundreds of thousands of people in a recent anti-lockdown protest in Romania. Okay, well, there were anti-lockdown protests in Romania, and this is a photograph from Bucharest, from the main national square. However, this photograph is from anti-government protests in 2017. And the recent protests in Romania were during the day and had hundreds of people rather than hundreds of thousands of people, but it was used as a means to sort of amplify potentially from an anti-lockdown perspective in terms of the turnout. And then the last one. In Michigan, in the USA, were 10,000 votes cast in the presidential election by people who were dead? I think most people might know that this one is actually fake, but it was the BBC and a lot of American news outlets did a lot of work around finding all the 10,000 people. And again, there were 2 people who had died, but they died after the presidential election, and a lot of people who were supposedly dead were actually alive. So the number of discrepancies they found were negligible. But this is really interesting in terms of talking to young people about sort of disinformation. So with more examples, we actually talk to the young people about the various different ways that stories can be misleading. So manipulated pictures, misinformation, rumour and hoax, deliberate, partial, only some of the information is true. And really importantly, talking about unproven stories, that sometimes you don't have enough information to actually have a judgment on a story, and it's better to actually say that rather than actually come out and actually say something without sufficient evidence. And then finally, sometimes you think a story that sometimes is going to be false is actually true. So for us, it's all about asking questions. And we use the 5 W's in terms of how journalists would actually ask questions, but in this case, interrogating sources. So it's looking at things like the who of a story. So the who has reported it, and have you heard of them? Is it a reputable news organisation? What is it actually about? Is it factual or is it biased? Then the next question, moving on, is about where is the information from? So who are they sourcing it from? Where is the actual information actually coming from? When was it published? Sometimes stories are actually published as news now, which are actually got a date that's much earlier on. And what was news in the past is not necessarily news now. And then finally, looking at the intention. Why are they reporting on this story? What are they trying to make you feel? What are they trying to make you actually do? So for us, those 5 are really, really important. And for young people, it's about taking the time to actually think, check, and actually do the research. And then we frame that in the context of how journalists should work in terms of making sure that their stories are accurate and trustworthy, and that they research their information, they check their facts, and that they talk to a variety of different people so they can see all sides of the story. So, having done those various interactions with young people, we also do a little bit about the history of fake news and get them to vote on when news was published in the past. And they compare that with the sort of dissemination of news today. We then go on and get them to create their own fake or for real show. And in a moment, Kelly's going to show you an example. Now, we're showing this example because it's available on YouTube, so you can look at it. And we get them to watch a video like this, one of these examples, and see how Leia actually presents, because then they're going to go on and create their own one.
Rat poison, pizza and upside down planes. Can you spot this week's fake news? This video shows a plane being twisted around in a typhoon. Fake or for real? It's fake. The video got 12 million views on Facebook as Typhoon Margaret spread across southern China. But this part of the video is computer-generated footage. This part is genuine, but it's from an unrelated incident. South Korean students used pizza to avoid military service. Fake or for real? It's for real. 12 students binged on pizza and hamburgers 5 times a day to fail the physical exam. A military investigation also found they swapped tips on how to gain weight by drinking high-calorie shakes. But prosecutors might force them to complete the military service anyway. All South Korean men must complete around 22 months before the age of 28. Russian agents poisoned a model at a restaurant in Salisbury this week. Fake or for real? It's unknown. Anna Shapiro claims that she and her husband were poisoned with strychnine by Moscow. The incident occurred in Salisbury, England, near where former Russian spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia collapsed from Novichok poisoning earlier this year. But it could all turn out to be a hoax. Police confirmed that 2 people did become ill at a restaurant last Sunday, but they found no links to the recent nerve agent poisonings. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to send us a message and let us know what you thought. See you next time. Bye!
So, having got the young people to actually look at an example, we then go on to talk a little bit more about how they're going to put their program together.
Rat poison, pizza and upside down planes. Rat poison, pizza and...
So a really important part of the workshop is to talk about researching. So they will be divided into groups. We provide up to about 18 stories per workshop, so they're divided up into smaller groups. And each group will be given 3 stories. And it's really important, and we talk a lot about them doing the research and providing detailed evidence for their answers and using those 5 Ws as a way to check that. A good way to do it is to open perhaps a news aggregator such as Google News and have as many tabs as you can open. There's some excellent work that's done by Stanford Education Group about horizontal research. Most young people are taught to read this way, that you read the entirety of one news report and then you read the next one and then you need the next one. But if you sort of do a search and actually open as many as you can from different news organisations and search horizontally across, then you can check, you can verify, but also you can see the different approaches that they might actually be taking as well. And also look at fact-checking websites, look at sites like Snopes or Full Fact. BBC have got one, AFP have got one. But again, it's really developing those sort of research skills and taking them away from that sort of linear approach to a more horizontal approach. And that when they do produce their fake or for real presentations, that they've got detailed research to back up their claims of whether it's fake or whether it's real. How the group produces it and organises it is up to the teacher. If they're in the education centre, we would mainly ask them to work in groups of 5, and they have directors, a main presenter and a reporter for each of the stories. In the current climate, it varies exceptionally. I mean, some are doing it in pairs, some are doing it individually. Some of them are making short videos on iMovie and then presenting them back. Some are just presenting to the rest of the class in front of the class. Some are even making podcasts. But the teachers have got the flexibility to do that in any which way that they want. We have just provided them with a range of stories, some of which are true, some of which are fake, some of which are unproven. So the students can then go off and do the research. We recommend it takes about half an hour probably for them to actually put their fake or real together. Sometimes it might be longer, but they can spend a good 10 to 20 minutes researching the stories, then scripting it, and then practicing it, and then they present it back to the class. So then the rest of the class vote on all the different fake or for real presentations. So they really get engaged with all the stories. So it's a really good, straightforward way to get young people to actually consider how news can or is trustworthy, or whether interpretations of news, but it really gets them to develop their critical analysis skills. So I think the teachers like it. 100% rated the sessions, the virtual sessions, either excellent or very good, and that it gave the teachers resources and ideas to support their curriculum subjects. They also strongly agreed that increased student engagement with news, so hopefully they didn't find it boring, that increased confidence in being able to check that the story is trustworthy, so increased student confidence in checking whether the story is trustworthy or not. And finally, it developed their questioning and their research skills. So our top 5 tips in building a workshop. Even with virtual, and this is not normally how I teach virtual, I would make it as interactive as you possibly can. So use the chat box, use the teacher, every 2 or 3 minutes have a point where they can answer back or ask questions. Think about how the students are going to learn. Think about the creative way that they can learn. This is not making anything up, it's all using real stories, but making that they actually create something at the end that enforces their learning. So in the case of fake or for real, it's that fake or for real video. In case of news, it's a newspaper, it's a features article. Think about accessibility. Think about making sure that that workshop is available to a whole range of needs within one group, so the young students can learn in a way that suits them. So, for example, with fake or for real, some people may not want to write and script. They might just want to do it as a podcast. They might just want to just do it in a way that works for them. Make it authentic. As I said, it needs to be based around real news, news gathering, how news should be put together, and finally make it unique. Make it something that teachers want to do, that students want to do, that engages them, and really links back to the importance of engaging young people with news and developing their critical analysis skills. I'm very briefly going to mention 2 other workshops that we offer. So we would normally have students for a whole day making a news front page in real time with real stories and pictures and editing and putting it all together through page production, actually in the education centre. We've managed to adapt this so it works in a virtual setting across 1 or 2 lessons, where we have an interactive session where we talk about news, engage them with news, give them ideas of what roles might be in terms of researchers, reporters, editors, headline writers, and then we set them up to actually create their own local news front page. Normally in our education centre, we have a software program that means they can output their page in InDesign, but we've managed to adapt it so it can exist in Google Classroom, and in this case in PowerPoint, so the students can actually create their news front page. And then we will normally go back in a second session once they produce their front page and give them feedback and answer their questions as well. So it's across 2 subject lessons of about half an hour interventions. And in the meantime, the students are then creating their creative product, and then we go back. And then the second workshop that we're doing for older students is feature writing. So this is for students aged 16 to 18. Again, this might be across 2 sessions. So it's all about young people discovering how feature writing or opinion writing is different in style and pace and structure from a news report, a news writing, and news gathering in a slightly different way. And then in the session, the students will interact with features and start to decide how actually to produce their front page. Just to point out, on the slide there, the front page with the blue, that's an actual Guardian feature page from our feature section of the newspaper. And the one with the red headline is one that a student produced as a result of our virtual workshops. We try and keep, in this case, the templates exactly the same. But it's been really interesting. And this is an opportunity for young people to sort of reflect on the current situation. And this was about attainment during lockdown. And I've also been asked to briefly talk about the archive. You saw Philip and my colleague from the archive in the video. The Guardian is going to be 200 next week. So we've had quite a history. And the archive has a whole range of amazing artifacts in its collection documenting the history of the Guardian. About 3 years ago, myself and the archivist decided that we wanted to run a workshop that would be available during the bicentenary year. So we piloted it using the method that I used before. We tried different versions of it. We tried a version for primary school students, one for older students, secondary school students. And in the workshop, the students got to hold a press conference with the archivist and interview them about their role, and then actually handle and engage with objects from telling the history of journalism. So things like the first ever laptop, a war reporter's helmet, and important things like photography and cartoons. In the secondary workshop, they actually produced a front page actually about the history of the Guardian through this interaction with the journalist. As a result of this workshop, we applied for funding from the Heritage Lottery Fund, and we're now running this workshop virtually. So what do our participants think about us? So here's a slide of a couple of comments from students and a couple of comments from some teachers. So in the top slides, you've got about researching and engagement, and then you've got from teachers about one about rolling out and spreading it out, and then one about the access. Very briefly, I'll talk a little bit more about Newswise, which is our primary programme, which it works for 7 to 11-year-olds. It's a partnership between us, the National Literacy Trust, and the PSHE Association. As with all media literacy and critical literacy, it uses the context of news to do this. It's a cross-curricular unit of work of up to 60 resources and workshops with underrepresented schools and opportunities to interact with journalists. And there's a core role of teacher training as well. So why this age group? Why 11-year-olds? Half of them have a smartphone. 74% are watching over 10 hours a week on YouTube. 1 in 5 have a social media presence, which is again slightly worrying. And 45% of them who own a mobile phone are actually taking it to bed with them. So they're out there in the digital world without necessarily all the skills they need to navigate it. As mentioned before, it's about making the sessions and the lessons fun, but also making it real, engaging with real stories, engaging with journalists, taking part in actual real sessions that actually reflect the roles that journalists actually do. And it's all about this, making it real and using real examples. One of our most popular lessons is on the Windrush scandal, and it really raises pupils' concern about social justice. If you're not aware of this story, a generation of people from the Caribbean were asked to come and work here in the 1960s. And about 3 years ago, a lot of them found that they had the right to stay here. They didn't have the right documentation, and some of them got deported. And this was a story that was raised by the government, raised by the Guardian, and eventually it led to one of the government ministers actually leaving her job. but as mentioned on the slide there, it really engaged young people with the news and made them realise about the role of the media in terms of holding democracy to account. So here are some brilliant feedback. So 4 in 5 pupils found it more easy to spot whether news was trustworthy. Twice more were able to check whether a story was fake or for real. 100% of teachers said their students had a better understanding of the different aspects of news and the difference between fact and opinion, and the engagement with news more than doubled after taking part in Newswise.
Thanks, Margaret. I'm back again, just very briefly, just to close. I know we're just slightly running over, but we wanted to give you, a lot of detail and some really in-depth information. So hopefully that's been useful. So what does the future look like for us? We have really big ambitions in the foundation to grow and scale our work, reaching more young people, creating even more opportunities. Over the last year, the pandemic has really made us reevaluate and think differently about the future. We've had to adapt, reshape, innovate, but these are positives that can come out of a situation like this, and we understand that. Transforming our digital capabilities as much as we could to still continue our work, to connect with participants, and that's really opened our eyes to the possibilities of broadening our reach. Our digital downloads have massively increased, meaning more people are using our resources. However, having said all that, we know that although reach is important and digital will now always be a part of our work, the depth of impact is still best achieved face-to-face. In particular, the types of young people that we're working with are often from the poorest, the hardest to reach, the most deprived areas. They don't have the access to the technology. They may not be in schools who have the right resources. And so we want to be back with them in person as soon as we can. And we're always exploring ways to reach them through more non-formal learning settings, for example, youth projects and community groups. So this will be more of a focus of our work in the autumn. So we're really excited and hopeful about the future, but as Greta Thunberg says, hope only comes through action. So we hope you've been able to take away some things today that you can action, but we would also love to hear from you. We know that a lot of you out there are really experienced media literacy specialists and are delivering your own programs, and we're always learning. So please do get in touch with us, share ideas, and we would love to connect with you. You can follow us on Twitter and do also visit our new website, theguardianfoundation.org, and that has our contact details on there as well. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you to Kelly and thank you to Margaret for this great presentation. Once again, I encourage all of you to write your comments and or questions in the Q&A section or in the comments or in the chat, I should say. So let's see, we have 2 responses so far. One says, thanks for this great presentation. Could we have it by email as well? I don't think it was planned for you to share this presentation as far as I know, but what I can tell you is that this video, along with the links to resources, will be available later. Okay, and we will provide you with that. Another is from Ernest. He says, I had experiences with parents who attacked me for pushing my agenda, quote, when talking about media literacy with my students. I used some examples from the news that were easily debunked by reverse image searches. Later that week, I received the criticism. I made sure to not get into interpreting politics and narratives, but still this negative experience. What do you suggest to do in these situations?
Okay, for me, that's very difficult. I mean, it depends on the context. Was that working directly with the students or with the teacher as well?
Well, he said I had experiences with parents who attacked me for pushing my agenda when talking about media literacy with my students.
Right, brilliant. Yeah, that is very tricky. It is difficult. It is something in terms of working in an environment to try and make sure that it's working with the young people in terms of helping them to work with their parents, but it is a very difficult thing. I mean, it occasionally happens to us, but I would also say we do a lot of work, particularly with younger children, about trying to teach news in a safe environment so young people feel confident being able to talk about the news. But it is tricky. It is tricky. I mean, it's trying to be as neutral as possible. It's trying to sort of make sure that you use wide examples. It's trying to sort of not come in and on the, again, I don't know the full context, so it's difficult for me to comment on this. So it is in terms of the context, we try and make sure that although we are a news organisation, that we try and be fair and balanced and not just, you know, and show that in the work that we do, but it is incredibly difficult.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds, you know, and we realize like the prevalence where we talk about the lack of media literacy, that it's actually, you know, in adults as well as children. And where, you know, we were talking before about where children get their news and friends and family is right up there, and one of the main ways. And we've started to look at actual family workshops as well through the Newswise programme, where we're again, when we're talking about bringing it out of the school setting, and it's almost sort of encouraging families to come with their children for their children to learn, but by proxy then the adults are also learning at the same time, if that makes sense, and coming to us afterwards and saying that they learned something. But yeah, I think especially, you know, in different societies where you have deep-rooted mistrust, or you have very fixed views about news and sources, that's super tough. And I think it sounds like you're doing everything you can to make sure that a range of sources, again, you know, we're the Guardian Foundation, but we're not just talking about the Guardian. We happen to have access to some resources there, but we're always talking about the range of sources. So yeah.
I was muted. Just to elaborate on this, Ernest has written that it was similar to the example you showed with the images, meaning one event, but images from another event years ago. I think he's referring maybe to the protest in Romania. That was was the example, right? I didn't comment on the event, just about how it can be skewed.
And reverse image search is something that we teach as well, you know, as a tool. So
So can you maybe, this was interesting for me to hear these family workshops. Can you maybe elaborate a bit on them? I think this could be really useful.
Yeah, so the Newswise programme tried these they were getting off the ground just before lockdown. And they were looking at the UK statistics and research into where were the most deprived areas, or the areas where there were particular issues, and selected different towns in the UK. So again, part of our work is trying to take out of London and the sort of bigger cities. So there were two events where they went to Middlesbrough, a city called Middlesbrough, and a city called Bradford, and they worked with the local football clubs actually as a venue. So they picked a venue that was attractive to the people in the area and where they felt a connection. So that was one method of engagement. They still worked with the schools, and they did a sort of so they still went into schools in the local area, delivered workshops like they would normally do, but then through the schools got in touch with the parents and talked about this family event where they could all come together. They were able then to use the football club's press room where they would do press briefings, and they had the children be the journalists and they were asking the questions, and it was very interactive. But being quite honest, trying to, like, in those communities where, like we say, there are deep levels of mistrust often in the media and of groups like us, coming along. It takes a lot, and it was successful, and it was really good to see the children with their families working through the workshops together. But even things like, we discovered having food at the event actually helped with getting people there. I think once people are there, then they can engage with the session and engage with the day. But sometimes it takes a little bit of persuasion, and especially in these areas, a free breakfast is a good thing as well, and to kind of partner up with people in those local areas. But yeah, it's just a series of workshops, interactivity, things that parents can do with their children. But it was really successful, and we really hope to do more.
Okay, yeah, food always helps, right? Okay, I have some questions, or rather, I should maybe give the advantage to Violetta Katzman, who has just written something in the chat. Thanks for this helpful presentation. Today we have heard that there is no separate subject, no separate media literacy subject in Britain. Researching the practice in the EU countries, I found the fact that high school there is a subject that EU countries is, as far as I can tell, have a subject called media education. That high schools in the EU have a subject called media education, and she's wondering, is this still the case, and if so, what are the verification/evaluation instruments for these kinds of subjects? I think that is what she is referring to.
Do you mean in the UK, do we have a particular media subject?
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, maybe talk about media studies, Margaret,
is,
and what's, I guess, what's missing from media studies. And,
there is media studies in the secondary level, but it's an optional subject. So you can pick to do it when you're 14, but the majority of students don't. So it's quite a small number of students that would take that up. And it has news, but it also has film and video, and it's a wider appreciation of media and culture. So it's not just, even within that one subject, media literacy, it's media studies, it's the wider sort of plurality of the whole media business, and it's films, magazines, news, online. So it's an optional subject that students can take. Otherwise, aspects of what you would call media literacy are spread across the secondary and primary curriculum in English, in terms of news production and how news is actually produced, and writing for a purpose. In history, in terms of analysing primary and secondary sources and verification, and how do you know interpretation of sources. There's a little bit in citizenship as well, which is a compulsory subject, but is not taught by specialists. So again, that's interesting in itself. I mean, there are a lot of citizenship teachers, but then it's something that's in part of what's called tutorial time. And then there's a bit in IT or computer science about online safety, and about sharing, and about digital skills as well. But it's not necessarily in one consistent place. It's sort of dotted across the curriculum, and there's no sense of mapping it across the curriculum either. So it just depends on if you're taught that aspect on that certain day, or a couple of units of that aspect in certain day. And then in PSHE, which is personal, social, economic and health education, that is a subject, again, where there are some specialists, but most of the work in that area is left to what we call form tutors, or tutorial time. So again, it's not necessarily taught by specialists, but it's something that you get given to actually teach that week. So again, it's difficult to actually, we can map it in terms of, we will look at how it fits in the curriculum and why teachers might want to come. but in terms of across the whole curriculum, it's in lots of different subjects, but in no one specific space. And I think that makes it quite tricky in terms of if you wanted to actually do research in terms of engagement across subjects, because it's not in one particular space.
Oh yeah, it's more spread out, right? It's not one particular subject, and that is actually what I was going to ask you about this formal education, this media literacy as part of the formal education. What do you think should be the best model for media literacy in formal education, and do you think it should be an integral part of formal education everywhere, based on your experiences in the UK, of course?
Yeah, that would be brilliant. And as Kelly mentioned, there is the government is working on a media literacy strategy, and in some countries, as you said, in EU countries, and it is definitely part and parcel of the curriculum. But also, I think from my perspective, I think it would also be, and this is my opinion, I think we need to define what we mean by media literacy, because it can be quite narrow and it can be quite wide. And I think we try to teach media literacy through the context of how news is produced and gathered, rather than it being just digital skills or just being able to do research. You see what I mean? I think it depends on how that definition actually is, and also how much it's a strategy and a societal change, and how much is invested in actually training and supporting teachers to actually deliver it as well. So it actually becomes something that's embedded rather than a bolt-on that teachers actually have to do. And I think that's really, really important. Kelly, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. Yes, we'd absolutely love it to be part of the curriculum. I mean, in terms of, and at least to see a framework in place, and it's not up to us alone to determine what the best model would be. We'd be obviously really happy to contribute to conversations with the education ministers, etc., around what that could look like. And as Margaret said, there are a lot of organisations out there doing similar work, and I think that's something that we really encourage, is that collaboration. We all bring something slightly different, and we should also listen to the teachers and parents and the children themselves on. That's super important as well, that these things aren't just top down, but I mean, you look at countries like Finland, and to see the impact of having really clear government support, where news and media literacy is embedded within the curriculum. They devised their curriculum with the Finnish government after 2014. So when the country was first targeted by fake news stories by Russia, and they developed multi-platform information literacy, strong critical thinking. They are core, like, cross-subject components of their national curriculum that they introduced in 2016. So they're now Europe's most resistant nation to fake news. And there's a reason for that, and it's going to take time, right? And when, because when we talk about with the parents that we mentioned earlier, but we have to listen to those parents. Like, we can't just sort of say, while it's really obvious that these stories are fake and we don't know how people can still believe this stuff, like, it comes from somewhere, right? And it has roots, and we have to invite those parents into the conversation and listen to where that comes from, rather than be immediately challenged. And I think that there are ways that you can do that through their children as well. And I think being part of the curriculum is so important.
Okay, Anita says thank you. It was very interesting, and she is wondering what is the solution for the lack of media literacy education in the UK. And I think this is something that you've mentioned. So she's wondering what are the subjects that are where the media literacy is involved in. let's put it that way, and what grades are students in? What is the age range, I guess, we're talking about for students?
Well, we've seen, I mean, Margaret's mentioned, I guess, all the subjects that we see where it forms a small part of it. In terms of age range, again, when Margaret talked about Newswise, Newswise have also since found that actually there is a need and demand even as young as 7 years old. Yeah. So they started off with 9 to 11, and they've now trialed a workshop for 7-year-olds. And so it's almost like you can't start too soon. Children are getting devices earlier and earlier. We see them with their own devices, and it's very natural. You see, little babies sometimes with magazines, and they do this to the pictures because they think they're going to move, and they're so used to having the iPhones and this type of thing in front of them. And I think it can't start too soon, and it's all about being age appropriate. Yeah. It's all about, you can gradually build that up, but the very fundamental sort of basic skills can be taught very early.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Aphrodita, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing your name, but says, greetings. I was wondering, how do you always make sure that perhaps you as the instructors are not being biased and misinformed about the coverage of a certain topic that you pass on to your students? Because after all, as journalists, especially when we discuss different regions of coverage, for example, the West versus East Europe media, we're always a bit inclined to one point of view, one side, then more than the other. Is there always one perspective when it comes to what is perceived to be fake news, especially in this polarized world of world media?
Well,
an important question.
Absolutely. Right? I would say I think you've got to really park your assumptions and just make sure that you research as widely as you possibly can, that you use appropriate examples, that you read and research, that you make sure that you're not using your sort of perspectives of coming from perhaps the UK or where it is really, really tricky, but you really need to do your research and planning and thinking, and think about who you're working with, and also just thinking about the stories that you're actually using. And we're changing and developing those all the time, and I think that's really, 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 really important. And I think that's the way to think about it. And it is, and I think when you're teaching, again, it goes back to that perspective of that you're trying to be as neutral as you possibly can, but it is tricky. I mean, not just saying that we're representing the Guardian, but we're trying to sort of show how you would actually try and do the best that you possibly can to actually research and verify that story, and make sure that you use all the appropriate resources that you possibly can. And it is tricky, but it's just trying to be that, and just making sure that you respond and answer questions and follow up. It's a bit of a waffly answer, but I think it's just trying to be as neutral as you possibly can in terms of when you are delivering, and making sure that you don't have blinkered perceptions. Does that make sense? And those assumptions that you would all, it's trying to make sure that you try to deal with all those sort of assumptions that you might make, or that people might make about the workshop that you're doing as well. So it's trying to be as neutral as you possibly can.
Okay, Kelly, anything to add?
I mean, I would only add that the sort of fake news aspect, and obviously we chose fake or for real workshop to walk you through, but actually the fundamental part of all of our programs is teaching young people the skills for them to make up their own minds. So that's the key difference. So we're not a fact-checking organization. No. We're not out there just trying to debunk fake news stories. What we're trying to do is use some examples. Of course, that's super important. Examples that might, especially examples that might seem true and maybe aren't obviously fake, and so, as Margaret said, really important to research those. But that's sort of a small part. A lot of what we do is really just helping people question what they see, and then they can make their own minds up, the same way as them telling their own stories, and making sure that they're sort of thinking before they report something just from their own perspective. And so we sort of take ourselves out of it, and I think it's important to just remain sort of neutral in that perspective. We don't say like this particular source is a terrible source. We do hold up and give examples of where we know that news organizations are trustworthy a lot of the time, but we also say sometimes people get it wrong, so it's up to you to question that stuff.
Very important.
We have a bit more time left, so just to ask you about we talked about formal education, but what about informal education when it comes to media literacy? What advantages does informal education have over formal education? Specifically, what advantages does informal education give us in educating young people?
I think for us, from our perspective, we can be a booked for a curriculum reason, or we can be an enrichment activity. When we're actually face to face and in the education centre, there is that sense of taking young people out of the classroom and that benefit that they get of coming into the working world. And for young people, they thrive in that sort of space because it's not seen as learning. It's seen as something that's additional and enriching, and they can learn in a different environment. That said, going into schools as well is really beneficial, depending on how that's actually done and how that's actually set up by the teacher. It's been really interesting doing virtual, that a lot of schools just love having us in, but it's more than just going in and doing an assembly or talking to the young students. It's actually about doing something different and engaging them in a different way. I know, for example, when the Newswise sessions are delivered in school, one of the teachers actually says we're doing Newswise rather than we're doing literacy, rather than we're actually doing PSHE. And again, that makes that a separate thing, and the kids are all excited about it, and they've turned their classroom into a newsroom. And again, it's that sort of sense of purpose, that they're developing skills and knowledge, but it's in a different environment in a different way. So and as I say, in the actual centre is really interesting in terms of that they're doing. The other advantage of an enrichment day for us, and also I'd say for the 2-hour Newswise workshop that they do face to face, is they're actually running something through, they're actually seeing it all the way through, they're actually creating something in real time as it actually happens, as opposed to across a whole number of lessons. It makes it real, it makes it interesting. They've got to make the decisions, they've got to actually produce their podcast video front page, they're in charge, and it's that empowering element to it that is really, really vital and interesting, and the young people actually are really engaged with that you're giving them control and they're making decisions and they've got to make deadlines, and it's actually real and enriching. So I think that there are advantages of both, but it's all about student engagement and interaction and how it's actually perceived and how it's actually developed as well. So I think there are advantages to both.
Yeah, I think given that them having the control, that's a big thing, right? As well, you can obviously, when you've got a class full of 30 11-year-olds, you need to retain some level of control. But there were good ways that you can do that by, okay, you're an editor and you're a reporter and these are your jobs, and so you have that control over what your job is and what your role is. But then you can make the teacher the editor-in-chief. So if anything, ultimately, needs to happen, the editor-in-chief can step in.
Yes.
However, they're for the most part, they're making the decisions. And actually, you immediately see like children step up to that and want to stay in over lunchtime to finish off their story because they have a deadline coming up. And, so, yeah, I think informal, still sort of often you can still access through formal education.
Yeah.
But actually, often you'll see the teacher also appreciating bringing that little level of informality to the classroom.
Okay, let's finish up on this. Just a quick question and quick answers, and then we'll let you all go. What would you say are the main lessons your team has learned when it comes to media, teaching media literacy to young people? And just give us some advice. What is that advice that you would give the rest of us that are working in this field?
I would say put young people at the centre of it. It's about them. It's about them developing their skills. It's about them engaging with the news. Make it as interactive as it possibly can be. Give them the roles, the power, the skills to actually engage with that in a way that you can manage, and or the teacher can manage. I would say it's about changing, it's about innovating, it's about making sure that it stays new and to the point, and it's relevant to where the young people actually are, that they can access it as well. So although we've been around for 20 years, we've constantly been changing, we've constantly been innovating, we've constantly been trying to keep up and reflecting that in what we actually do. But at the end of the day, it's empowering young people for us. It's about making sure that those young people can engage with the news and be critical and get some sense of ownership and learn through doing. Learn through actually, rather than us telling them, learning through doing, learning through making, creating, engaging with news, so they can learn and feel that they've got a sense of ownership of it. Kelly?
No, I wouldn't add anything.
Okay, we can end on that.
+1.
Okay, right. Okay, thank you to Margaret and thank you to Kelly. Just a quick reminder, tomorrow we have another webinar in our series. I have just posted the link in the chat. That one will be on regulation and self-regulation of social media. And the speaker will be Gillian York from the Electronic Frontier Foundation. So I've posted the link in the chat. That webinar will start at 2 p.m. tomorrow, so the exact same time as our webinar today. Okay, so once again, I want to thank Kelly Walls and Margaret Holborn of the Guardian Foundation. I think this was very useful and very interesting. So thank you for that. I think that's all the time we have for today. So have a great day and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.